Welcome to episode 37 of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want, and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. And with that said, let's get going. So first up is the Firekeeper and Firelink Shrine. And naturally, whenever any character's face is hidden in any game, it drives me nuts. I need to know whether or not they have a face underneath. And most of the time, the answer is no. But in this case, the Firekeeper does have a face, and she has gray eyes. And you know what? Let's continue this subject. The Shrine Handmaid also has eyeballs, which is a little unusual because if you look at many of the character models in this game, characters can go without eyeballs, like they can just have eye sockets. But for some reason, the Shrine Handmaid does have eyes, and they look, well, they look rotted, I guess. I don't know how to describe this, but these eyes are unique to this character alone. I've checked a lot of eyeballs in this game, and none look this grotesque. And now it's time to look at some fun memory-saving aspects of Dark Souls 3. Did you know that when you turn your camera away from any person or enemy, the game drastically lowers their frames per second, so that many characters, objects, and environments can all exist in a cohesive world at any given time? And it almost looks like the animation from the Lego movie. Jeez, there's a lot to cover in Firelink Shrine. Anyways, what's underneath Firelink Shrine? Well, interestingly enough, there's a pair of gravestones. They're just underneath the map. Now, some of you more tech-savvy players out there might be thinking that this is just an object in an unloaded area. I did make sure that is not the case, and as for why these gravestones are left underneath the map, we'll never know. And also, the most iconic bonfire in the game used to be more than just a fire pit. If you take the camera below the surface, you can see that it actually was at one point a stone vessel, and the developers decided to just submerge it underground. So if you watch my Dark Souls 1 episode, you can see that a lot of environments in the distance are actually fully rendered, and sometimes to a ridiculous degree. It's insane how important detail is to the world of Dark Souls. However, the most interesting thing in Dark Souls 3 is that there is a hidden village way off into the distance, far beyond the view scope of the player. Now, to give you an idea of just how far away this is, we have cut through at least 5 layers of clouds, and the camera right now is moving 20 times faster than the running speed of a player. Now, it looks really similar to the Undead Settlement, but the only thing is that it's geographically inaccurate, which usually is important in the world of Dark Souls. I swear I was taken aback many times while looking at this area. There's little details you would never expect to see. Like, behind this building there's a horse stable. You know, it's incredible to imagine that when you're peeking off a balcony or off top a roof, that land so far off in the distance that you can't possibly reach really does exist. Or in this case, one you can't even see. So here's a nice zoom out of one of the dragons from Dark Souls 3. Dragons are a great creature to make your character seem small and insignificant, so moving the camera around freely is a lot of fun in these instances, because now we as the viewer get to see how small the dragon is compared to the world at large. You know what's funny is I love and hate the archer guy. I hate him because at the start he kills you so many times. I mean, if you're really good, you probably didn't die at all. But I love him because it's such a clever idea. It's such an imaginative idea. A giant shooting arrows from a tower, landing into a specific spot in the world of Dark Souls 3. Now, what's interesting is that when I put thought into it, I honestly thought that the arrows were just dropping down from the sky and they weren't really coming from the giant itself. But perhaps I'm becoming too much of a cynic from doing this series for so long. Because if we take the camera over to the giant, you can see that right from the very start, he shoots the arrow goes through a trajectory and lands at the spot that he aimed for. So whether he's for or against you, your character is going through these tiny little skirmishes off in the distance. All the meanwhile, this giant is shooting huge bolts that eventually land in your position. So one thing I never addressed in the Dark Souls 1 episode was I never found out what's exactly behind the fog walls at any given moment. Now, it's different from boss to boss, but in most cases, all the bosses are waiting in the room in anticipation for your fight with them. And some bosses have some very interesting results. Now let's be honest, there is one guy running the show here, but this boss is called the Deacons of the Deep. And that one guy you need to kill in order to finish this boss fight doesn't come out right away when you start the boss battle. But what's really cool, and I found this completely by accident, if you look inside the large stone structure that centers the arena in which you fight, you can actually find the real boss waiting in the center. Look, I'm not going to be coy here. The only reason why I thought to check this is because I watched that Did You Know Gaming episode where they covered this already. But it's still very cool to see it from a boundary breaking perspective. It is said that the giant eyeballs on the basilisks are a fake, they're a phony. The real eyeballs are these tiny little things right above the mouth. So if we take the camera over to this creature and zoom it in, we can see that to be true. In fact, we can get a great look at these tiny little eyeballs that they actually own. Although who's to say they don't have 4 eyeballs? Hey, you know what? Speaking of eyeballs, let's talk about the Black Knight. Now, with the Black Knights, I always wanted to know if they had a face, and apparently they don't. But they do have eyeballs for whatever reason, and their eyeballs don't have retinas or pupils. It's just a metallic sphere to represent the eyeballs. Now, I took a close look at how this looked in-game. This is not a graphical error. They just simply don't have faces. They only have these weird metallic orbs for eyes. Now we've got our first viewer request. This request comes from Milch Class from Twitter, and he requests a look around in the Wolniers area. And this was a good idea, because for this area you have to get warped to it. It's very unclear where you are at the moment, but if we zoom the camera out, we can actually see that we're very close to a very familiar area to Dark Souls fans. And that place is Anor Londo. To save on memory and loading times, they made this area very close to the vicinity in which you activated it, which in turn is coincidentally near Anor Londo. Now here is the most beautiful area in the game with the hardest name to pronounce, Irithyll of Boreal Valley. Please send your most disgusted comment now. But of all the zoom outs I wanted to do for this game, this one makes the most amount of sense. It's such an elaborate city, and it's set up in such a way that it's supposed to take your breath away the moment that you see it for the first time. And when I zoom the camera out, I'm happy to say I remain breathless. It's such a great looking area. And for the 3rd game in a row, the developers prove that they really care about making a beautiful world, one that feels more like a reward and not so much a hurdle. Here's Aldrich, Devourer of Gods, and we're looking at him today for 2 reasons. One is that we get a better look at his face, and the other is to point out an interesting fact that when your character is not near a boss, they make noises that you'd never be able to hear while they anticipate your arrival. I believe this is the first time we ever found sound while boundary breaking. Here's a zoom out of a large contraption used to elevate yourself in Anor Londo. Now it looks so natural that it almost looks like a cutscene is playing out right now. But if you're in game, you actually never get to see it at this scope. Instead, all you get to see is what your character is able to see while you're in play. Well, gee, this sure does look familiar now, doesn't it? You know, since I did a zoom out of this room in the last Dark Souls episode, I figured I'd do another one for Dark Souls 3 to give you a comparison. And believe it or not, it doesn't look that much different, especially since I cast the last one in Eternal Twilight. Now, I don't need to educate the most astute Dark Souls fan that the geography for Anor Londo is much different than it was from Dark Souls 1, but at least it got the placement of the room right. You know, speaking of geography, I feel like I haven't been doing enough zoom outs of areas in general. And I say this because every time I do a zoom out, it's always amazing to me how much of the geography is in one load of Dark Souls. I think what's refreshing about Dark Souls is my show removes the illusion of game worlds. Yet no matter where I take the camera, this game always reminds me it's there. This next request comes from Jono, and he asks, what's inside a sleeping mimic? Hey, thanks for the request, man. It was a really good one. See, when we take the camera inside the box, the first thing you'll see is that the teeth are there and they are lined up around the edges, and you may notice a whole mess of stuff behind it. Over in the back, we have the tongue rolled up backwards, and the limbs scrunched in as well. And it may look really cramped in here, but believe it or not, the entire body's not in this box. No, in fact, if we take the camera below the surface, every mimic has its body underneath the ground. And when the player activates the fight with the mimic, you can actually see it pull its body out. And here's how the rat tunnels work. Unfortunately, Dark Souls auto-saves its progress, so I wasn't able to hit record just in time, but what you're seeing here is the tail end of how the load-in works. Essentially, the second that the rats start moving towards your character, another rat immediately loads into place, so we can wait for its turn to go through the tunnel. Really quick, I just want to show you a different perspective of man versus giant. How could I leave out my favorite characters from the Dark Souls series, the Katarina Knights? So Agarillo Bob asks if I can take the camera into the well while Sigward of Katarina is stuck in there. And I'm very happy to, but he's not down there. He isn't in the well, but I think this scene is salvaged by the idea that we can see the depth of the well, or just having the certainty of knowing that the developers never intended for you to see Sigward during this part of the side quest.
It's me, Sigvard of Katarina. I'm loath to admit it, but I've been had. Well, hasn't it been all too long? It's good to see you.
Now that to me hardly counts as including Sigward into the episode, so let's do a zoom in behind his helmet to see what Sigward looks like. And it turns out the lovable elf looks exactly like Ken Bone. Couldn't be more perfect.
To your valor, my sword, and our sworn duties. Long may the sun shine.
Here's a nice zoom out of the painted world. Now, unfortunately, you're not really able to see everything that this area has to offer because there's so much snow and haze obscuring our vision when we zoom the camera out. But a nice spin around is not so bad. So here you go, a 3-for-1 deal. 1, you get to see a zoom out of a boss fight, which is always cool. But 2, this is a very unique arena for this boss. If we take the camera out, we can see that this one area has 2D textured backdrops to save on memory. Now you may be wondering to yourself, well, what's number 3? Well, number 3, I found out, the boss fight music has parameters for triggering it. So if we take the camera outside of those parameters, the boss music will stop. And when we take the camera back to the boss fight, it trips over a flag and reactivates the song. It restarts it, actually.
It's a giant worm! They're sinking cities with a giant worm!
Sorry, it's not often I'm able to use that quote from Gears of War 2. Anyways, this request is for the giant worm in Smoldering Lake, and they want to know what it looks like when the worm is underground. And this was easily the best suggestion. It was also the first, but the best suggestion, because Dark Souls has been really good about keeping out silly technical stuff out of all of its cutscenes, or whatever else, but here we get at least a small taste of one of the funny things the game developers do when they move a character model outside of the player's view. And now we're taking a look at the end of the game, Kiln of the First Flame, and it's a really cool area. All the buildings in the background kind of remind you of Inception almost. They're almost collapsing in on themselves, and I don't think I could state this enough, despite the fact that there's so many buildings here. So much going on. The game runs perfectly fine and we have a beautiful landscape. Okay, so, alright, so that was Dark Souls 3. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a ton of fun making it, of course. It was a long time coming. And this week we're not going to be doing a vote for the next week's episode because I'm going to be doing a collaboration with 2, probably 1, but maybe 2 very important people. One is A+ Start, who you may know from Son of a Glitch, and the other I haven't really talked to about yet, but I know that he wants to do a collaboration, so he might be down. Beta64, if you're down for this collaboration, I'd love to have you on. The game that we're going to be covering is Conkers Bad Fur. That's plural with a bad fur day.
Wouldn't it be possessive?
Could be. I don't know. I failed English. Anyways, guys, I'll see you next week. Take care.
Doodles!
Bye.